So what is it parents want for their adult children? Probably the same thing everybody wants for their adult children. What kind of relationship do we want with our adult children? Well, probably the same thing we want with our friends and other loved ones. The question for us today is, what part does your spiritual life play in that? And that's what we're going to consider as we consider the power of prayer for parents of adult children. And Jesus' advice is a good place to start. How often should I forgive? 70 times 7 is an exaggeration. You're not supposed to have a clicker, and then you know that when you get to 70 times 7 times 7, whatever it is, that then you can be angry. So first you have to forgive. Hop, done forgiving. I used up my number. I cannot forgive. Jesus is using an exaggeratedly large number so that you'll understand there is no time that it's going to be good for you to hold on to anger and resentment. So keep at it. And this is no small part of what gives us heartburn as parents of adult children, or as adult children whose parents are still living, or as adult children whose parents are dead, or as anybody who has to come out of their house and deal with anybody on any given day. The struggle to live healthfully and well and lovingly with others is going to take forgiveness. It's going to take some forgiveness. So Jesus isn't just asking us or telling us to do a good thing. He's telling us how to have a healed, healthy, happy life ourselves. You notice he doesn't really, in the original story, that story about the slave, Jesus isn't really talking about what's good for the slave. He's talking about what's good for the slave owner. And that's why the slave owner knew to forgive. And then he comes to the second slave, and he's making an example of him, not because he's somehow unfair, but because who is ever going to be happy if they keep hanging on to that anger? And as we already know from psychology, hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. So our relationships with our adult children involve a lot of forgiveness because we have moved into a completely different territory. Your heart is still with your children when they become adults. Whenever I'm around my adult kids, I'm just always a little on the edge of being weepy because no matter what else it's about, it's always a little bit about what it isn't anymore. They're not little anymore. They're not snuggly anymore. Well, one of mine is snuggly, but the other one not so much. And my time with them and that sort of nostalgia for when they were younger is my reminder that they need a completely different relationship with me than they did then. Completely different. And I'm the one responsible for making that shift. I'm the one responsible for making that shift. We all have some things that we wish were different about our adult children's lives. Maybe you don't like who their partner is. Maybe you don't like their politics. Maybe you just wish they hadn't gotten so many tattoos or that they'd give up smoking. I don't know. But what really breaks our hearts for adult children and any of the adults who are friends that we love is the real heartbreaker is they have adult problems. They don't have the kinds of problems that we can throw money at and solve, that we can intervene with the school teacher and get fixed. A hug or a Band-Aid or even a good advice session isn't going to do it because our kids are going to have the same kind of problems we had, the kind somebody else can't figure out for you. And that's part of why adult parenting, adult children, is so much harder because you may think you have the answer, but everyone's different. You know how I can tell that I'm in safe territory to give my kids advice? They say, "Hey, Mom, I want some advice." In the absence of that, it's my job to not offer advice. And so far, I'm getting a C- in that. I learned a lot of what I'm going to tell you by spending quite a few years in Al-Anon. I began Al-Anon over 20 years ago when my kids were just moving into adulthood. They were both out of the house, but only barely, right? And if you shake my family tree, alcoholics fall out on their heads everywhere. But I didn't realize it impacted me because most of the alcoholics in my family, extended family and sphere of influence, had been sober for years. I didn't realize how much someone else's drinking that I didn't think affected me at all affected me. I learned differently. Al-Anon is for anybody who has alcoholics in their life that are affecting their life now or used to affect their life. Most of us figure as soon as the drinker stops drinking that everything will be fine. Not true. So I learned a lot of stuff. And what I mostly learned is that the 12 steps are a great spiritual program with practical applications that came into my life at just the right time as my kids were becoming young adults. And it strengthened my spiritual life, and it really gave me some tools for my soul work. And so what I'm going to share with you today is just a couple of things that when I learned when my kids hit early adulthood, and I had to make some big changes in my parenting. And spoiler alert, it's all about forgiveness. It's all about forgiveness. Jesus knows what he's talking about. Funny that. So here's a little thing to know, and really know in your heart of hearts. Your adult children have a God. Your adult children have a God, and you're not it. Your adult children have a God, and you're not it. You cannot fix them. But by your own growth, you can free them from some of the obstacles to their happiness and growth. With God's help, we can give them a kind of spiritual freedom by letting them have their own lives. And the way we do that is we claim God's grace in our own lives, and we claim our own freedom. As a parent, I can free my children when I stop having their feelings for them. I'll never forget, I was probably 30-something. And after church one day, my mom said, "I was so embarrassed for you that you wore that dress." Now, I was old enough that I turned to her, I said, "What are you doing having my feelings for me?" But it wasn't a pleasant experience for either of this. And we are not letting our children have their own lives when we interpret everything they're doing as something that's happening to us. When we interpret all of their choices and all of their behaviors as something that's happening to us. And if I can't be happy unless my children are happy, I'm never going to be happy. Can you imagine living like that if you had 12 kids? You wouldn't have a moment's peace. But if you can only be happy if your children are happy the way you think they should be happy, So here are some things connected to forgiveness. And the reason Jesus says 70 times 7 is that this is hard work. What he's trying to say is this isn't sweep stuff under the rug. This isn't forgive and forget. This is do the hard work of real forgiveness, which means not letting someone take up space in your head anymore. So if you don't have adult children, or you don't have any problems with your adult children, come and tell me how you managed that. But if you don't have any adult children, you probably have other adults in your life who are giving you heartburn, or who at least occasionally give you a reason for resentment. So this stuff works for everybody that's taking up space in your head, and it works. It works. The change comes. It happened to me. So first idea, forgive your adult children for anything they may have done to hurt, disappoint, neglect, or anger you. And I don't care if it was yesterday or last week or when they were 12. Now, I would love to stand in front of you and say, oh, I don't hold a resentment toward either of my children for anything they did in their teen years. And you'd know I was a liar. Well, at least those of you who have ever had to be parenting teenagers would know I was a liar. So we start by asking God to show us what's lurking in us. Not what's unhealed and imperfect in them, but what's lurking in us toward any of our adult children or cousins, nieces, nephews, people we've known for 20 years and they're our best friends, but still they sometimes get on our nerves. And this applies to any relationship that's giving you lingering feelings of resentment. If you find yourself driving down the road having an argument with somebody who isn't there, this might help. Now, one thing that a lot of people will tell you is it's good to clear the air. Maybe. It's not always good to clear the air. You might want to write a letter about what's going on with you or journal and set it aside. You might chat with a therapist about how to clean up the mess of this relationship, or at least clean up your side of the street. If there's something that needs saying, God will prompt you and give you the words and will offer you an opportunity. So if you're not feeling prompted by God, and if you're finding that you struggle with the right words because God isn't giving you the right words, and God never seems to give you the opportunity to bring this up, maybe that's not where the healing is going to happen. Sometimes you do need to say something. And I forgive you for being such an idiot and ruining our family's reputation is not what it's going to be. Right? And that's why mostly this is our work. Most of the stuff that we try to do to clear the air really only makes things worse. And part of the reason it makes it worse is because if you feel bad and you want to have a conversation with one of your adult children, you are now demanding that they begin to be responsible for your feelings. I don't know if that's an ouch for you. It was an ouch for me when I first realized it. So what is going to help us the most is learning how to forgive ourselves, to notice what's holding us hostage, and work with someone who can help you let go of that. After all, if your children are adults, I used to say, you know, if you're still complaining about your parents after you're 25, it's yours now. Whatever gifts your parents gave you, good, bad, indifferent, it belongs to you now, and the only one who can heal it is you. Same if you have adult children. If your children are adults now, whatever is going on with you is going on with you. Sometimes it continues to go on in the relationship, and I'm here to tell you, once you heal the old stuff, the today stuff starts to change too. So here's a trick that has always, always, always worked for me. Get on your knees. Honestly, this is harder than it used to be. Get on your knees every morning for 2 weeks and pray for whichever child or person or relationship or niece or nephew or boss is problematic for you. But don't pray, I want them to this, I want them to that, I want them to the other thing. Pray for them to have whatever you want most in the world. You want to win the lottery, pray for them to win the lottery. You want to have a really good marriage, pray for them to have a really good marriage. You want peace in your heart and to let go of anger, pray those things for them. You're not going to pray for them to have what you want them to have. You're going to pray that they will have what you want most. And this has never failed me. In 2 weeks, something shifts. It doesn't shift far, but it shifts a little, and that's the beginning of the big change. Here's one that's a little more problematic, and it may not apply to you, but it seems to apply to most people I talk to. Forgive your adult child's other parent. Forgive your adult child's other parent. And if you think about your parents, you may have experienced some of this. A long time ago, I was talking to my oldest and dearest friend, a very, very wise woman, and she was telling me how after 3 decades of work with therapy and counseling and prayer, in her late 60s, she finally forgave her father for being the kind of father most of us don't want to have. And I remember thinking, oh, good grief. It really does. And her father was long dead. He'd been dead for 20 years. How hard is it to get over the wounds we experience in our family of origin? We all experience wounds in our family of origin. Do I really want to make that harder for my kids? Do I really want them to have to sit there and listen to me rehearse my resentments about their grandparents or their aunt or their dad? No. This will completely change your relationship with your adult children, because whenever your adult children hear you talking about their grandmother or their uncle or their mom or their dad or even their sibling or even their friend, and you complain, they are hearing you complain about them in between the lines. Especially if you've got a kid who is more like your ex. If you've been divorced, this is so hard, because nobody gets out of a divorce without some resentments. And almost everybody who's divorced can see their ex-partner's failings, not always their virtues, but always their failings, in their kids. And so that's hard to learn to do. But the healing comes if you're willing to do your prayer work. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and the shift will happen. And finally, forgive yourself for anything in the past where you feel you could have done better as a parent. And the past might be yesterday, and the past might be 27 years ago. Problems will always be with us, and our ability to navigate them will always be imperfect. And if you have made mistakes, well, let's be honest. When you made mistakes, you can ask God to redeem them. You can ask God to help you let go of them, but also to use them as a way of looking at where your prayer work needs to be happening. This is you finding forgiveness from God, not from your children. I may need forgiveness from my kids for something I've done. Here's how that works. Once in a while, I will go to them and say, I'm sorry. And that more and more happens in the moment. I'll be bossing my daughter about what to do, and she'll look up and she'll say, I know what I'm doing. I'm like, yeah, you're 38, you have 2 kids, of course you know what you're doing. And then I just say, I'm sorry, I was helping again. And we both laugh. But what more often happens is I want to drag my kids into a long conversation about how I feel. I want to drag my kids into a long conversation about how I feel. And my spiritual healing is not their job. It's God's job. Most of us, though, persist in going to the wrong place to feel better. We take that to the Lord in prayer. Change comes when we do our spiritual work, and then when your behavior changes, that's how you get forgiveness from your kids. Is when you begin to behave differently, they will sense the shift and things will change for them too. Prayer is not telling what God to do, you know this, but it's easy to forget. So I want to suggest today that when we talk about partnering with parents to build faithful families, our prayer is partnering with God to see that love's will is done. You don't have to fully understand what God's will is in order to pray that love's will be done. I was so touched years ago by one of my church members. I was really kind of perplexed and moved when her son, who was in his early 30s, left his rehab again, not for the first time, and was back on the streets. And she was sharing with me how over the years she had learned how to let him have his own life and really give him to God. She realized the hard way that she could not save him. Addiction is an evil disease, and a lot of people can't be saved no matter how clever, how smart, how hard their parents work. And I just watched her have a life of joy and fulfillment, even with this heartbreak alive every moment. Only people who've lived through something like this can really, truly understand each other. And when you find some people whose presence really helps you heal this, they're a real treasure. Hang on to them. I hope you have someone like that in your life. If you don't, my office is over here. And now, as the sermon title promised, I am going to share with you my favorite adult parenting skill that came out of all of this forgiveness learning. And I learned it in my prayer life as it got deeper and deeper. And as my children got into their young adult years, they would tell me things that were not preceded by, "Mom, I could use some advice." They would just start telling me something. And instead of suggesting answers or trying to fix it or jumping in it to solve it with money I didn't really have, I learned to perfect the art of the O. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. Say, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more." "Oh, I want to hear more. Keep talking." "Huh. Isn't that interesting?" Now you have become a listener instead of a fixer. You know, I don't know about you, but I come from a family of strategists. And one of the things I valued the most about my parents was if I needed a strategy partner to talk about something with, I would call one of them. But I had to ask. Well, I had to ask after I told them to stop telling me what to do unless I asked their opinion about what to do. Right? So I learned it from that way, but I needed a whole new lesson when it was my kids. If your kids are looking for, your adult children are looking for a strategy partner, they'll tell you. Otherwise, they're just sharing their life. Now, don't you want to encourage that? Don't you want to encourage them to see you as a cheerleader, a shoulder to cry on, or just to talk to about whatever happened today? "Oh, tell me more." Try that. "Oh, you must be so disappointed." "Ah, that's hard, but you're smart." And while I tell you all of this about parenting adult children, which is when I learned it and when it really seems to come into full fruit, I have to tell you, almost every day when I'm down there with the preschool, I watch all of the preschool teachers behave exactly this way with the 3-year-olds. "Oh, you're okay. Oh, really? Someone was not playing fair?" Yeah. So that's what we have to give our kids, the gift of ourselves. And as they become adults, they will learn to treasure that way more than your advice, your money, or anything. Well, maybe not your car, but this is the gift we have. So I want you to do a little prayer exercise with me right now. Just close your eyes and take a breath or two. Close your eyes, put your feet on the floor, open your hands. And I want you to think about one of your adult children or another friend or relative that's on your mind a lot lately. And just say their name 2 or 3 or 4 times quietly under your breath while you breathe. And then let the voice of God say, "I love them." Use their name. "I love Paula so much. I am with her." So go ahead and do that 3 times. Just hear yourself say that to you as if God were saying it. God of love and grace, remind us to stop and listen for your voice. Remind us to stop and listen for your guidance, your healing, your love. Teach us to trust you with even the most precious thing we have. Friends, family, children that we love beyond words. Show us where we are standing between them and you, where we are trying to do for them what only you can do for them. And teach us to attend to our own love and grace and healing. And God, send us friends with whom we can share this spiritual path, this prayer work, this soul care. And thank you for Jesus, who always reminds us that when we practice love, we ourselves are healed. We pray all these things in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, Amen.